Story number 1. I remember the chill that clung to my spine that autumn, the way the leaves seemed to rustle with whispered secrets as I made my way through the suburb's dimly lit streets. It was 2001, a year stamped with its own brand of horror, yet what unfolded for us was a different kind of terror, one that still haunts the edges of my dreams. My brother, Luke, was always the genius between us, his mind an intricate web of stars and physics. He'd landed a job straight out of college with a team at NASA, analyzing live feeds from the International Space Station. I was driving home from my night shift at the local diner when my cell phone rang. It was Luke, and the tremor in his voice set my heart pounding. "Sarah, you need to come over. Now." He didn't wait for my reply. When I arrived, his apartment was littered with papers, the walls plastered with mission logs and faded photographs of astronauts. The live feed from the ISS looped on his screen, a spectral anomaly that made my blood run cold. There, Luke pointed to the figure in the background behind the unsuspecting crew members. "Do you see him?" I did, a figure, an extra crew member that would appear and disappear. Luke rewound the feed. When noticed, the figure seemed to flicker and then fade like smoke into the sterile air of the station. "We're not supposed to see him," Luke whispered, a haunted edge to his words. His obsession grew, and so did our fears. Delving into old Russian mission logs, Luke uncovered references to a cosmonaut who had vanished during a mission decades prior. They called him the Vanishing Cosmonaut. I was walking back from the local library with Luke when he told me he'd reached out to others, young experts like us. There was Katya, a Russian linguist, Marco, a tech whiz, Jenna, a journalist, and Evan, a historian specializing in Cold War anomalies. Our investigation spiraled into something beyond science. We discovered an audio log in Russian, a frantic voice speaking of shadows, a presence that shouldn't be there. Katya translated with trembling lips, her face as pale as the moon. "They summoned something," she said, "devil worship in the silence of space, a seance that opened a door." I was lying awake that night when the call came. Marco was dead. An accident, they said, but his apartment was ransacked, his computer smashed. One by one, members of our group fell victim to strange accidents, or so it seemed. Jenna vanished without a trace, leaving behind her notes and a voice message. "They're here," she whispered. "There." I was sitting in Luke's apartment when it happened. The shadows stretched and twisted, and the air grew cold. We felt it, an oppressive presence, watching, waiting. Luke's research, our poking into the dark history of space exploration, had invited something into our world. "We need to stop," Luke gasped, his voice hoarse with fear. But it was too late. Evan was found in his home, an old book on exorcism clutched to his chest, his eyes wide with eternal terror. The police ruled it unexplained. The local papers whispered of a curse. I knew better. We had peeled back a cosmic curtain and glimpsed the abyss beyond. Luke became a recluse, whispering of ghosts and spectral cosmonauts that haunted his waking hours. I moved away from that cursed suburb, carrying the weight of our discoveries like chains around my neck. Now, years later, as I narrate this to you, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see that vanishing cosmonaut, or worse, the dark entities we unknowingly unleashed. But I warn you, reader, some truths are too terrifying to seek, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Story number 2. The year was 2001, and the world still echoed with the aftershocks of turn-of-the-century fervor and fear. I remember the crisp autumn air nipping at my cheeks as I was walking down the leaf-strewn path to the nondescript government building where my brother, Alex, worked. Alex was a communications analyst, a genius with frequencies and codes. His latest project was shrouded in secrecy, but it had him more on edge than I'd ever seen. It was only when I found him in his lab, face white as a sheet, that he finally confided in me. I was analyzing data, Alex muttered, from a suit that belonged to an astronaut long considered lost. I was sitting across from him, our hands wrapped around mugs of coffee that had long since gone cold. The suit had been found in a crater near our small suburban town, which was bizarre enough. But it was what Alex found within the suit's final transmissions that turned our lives into a waking nightmare. The suit had recorded everything, vitals, audio, video, but it was the audio that haunted us. The astronauts' whispers were inaudible at normal frequencies, but Alex had decoded them, isolating a voice so full of terror it made my skin crawl. "He's pleading for help," Alex had said, his own voice a hushed whisper, from somewhere, not here. Nightmares plagued us, filled with images of that lost astronaut reaching across the cosmos, his pleas becoming the soundtrack of our sleep. But the real horror began when other voices joined the astronauts, a chorus of whispers, begging, pleading, screaming from the void. We should have stopped there. But we didn't. Alex, along with his colleagues, Emily, a linguist, Jordan, an engineer, and Rachel, a physicist, became obsessed with uncovering the truth. I was pulled into their vortex of madness, unable to leave my brother to face the darkness alone. Emily was the first to connect the voices to historical accounts of devil worship in our suburb, rituals asking for knowledge and power from beyond. I was driving to her house when I got the call. She had been found dead, an old book of exorcisms open to a page marked protection. Rachel theorized the suit had become a conduit for something otherworldly, a bridge between our dimension and a place where time and space were meaningless. Jordan worked tirelessly to trace the suit's journey back to Earth, but he never finished. I was walking into the lab when I stumbled upon the scene, his body lifeless, his eyes open, staring at something I couldn't see. Fear gripped our small community. Unexplained deaths followed, each marked by the presence of the whispers, which were no longer confined to the lab. They were in the static of televisions, the crackle of radio waves, the rustling of leaves. I remember the night the whispers called my name. I was alone, my heart pounding as the shadows seemed to creep closer. I fled, leaving everything behind, including Alex. It happened to me. I was the only one to escape. Alex and Rachel vanished on the night of the town's greatest horror when the sky itself seemed to scream with the voices of the damned. The suit, the whispers, the disappearances, they became a creepypasta, whispered about in forums and dark corners of the internet. I wish it were just a story. I wish I could forget the terror in Alex's eyes as he spoke of other dimensions and entities beyond our understanding. Now, years later, as I narrate these events, I am far from that cursed suburb, but the whispers still find me in the stillness of the night. They remind me that some doors, once opened, can never be closed, and some things that come through may never leave. Story number 3. In the fall of 2003, the world seemed as ordinary as it ever had in the quiet suburb where I lived, the kind of place where nothing unusual ever happened, until my brother, Ethan, uncovered something that turned our reality inside out. I was driving home when Ethan called, his voice a cocktail of fear and excitement. He worked at NASA headquarters as a junior engineer, a place where space was the business and stars were the ceiling. But it wasn't until he spoke of Floor 5 that the hair on my neck stood on end. There's a floor that doesn't exist, Sam. It's not on any plan or map. But it's there, he said, sounding almost mad. The next day, I was walking the corridors of NASA HQ with Ethan. He showed me the elevator, its button shining, except where the number 5 should be. That's when Ethan did something he had done before. He pressed the non-existent button for Floor 5, and to my shock, the elevator lurched upwards. The doors opened to a sight that might have been ripped from an H.P. Lovecraft nightmare. The dimly lit floor was silent, save for the hum of old fluorescent bulbs. The air was cold, suffused with the scent of decay and old metal. Rooms lined the hall, within them suits of astronauts that belonged in a museum, but these moved subtly, as if taking slow, deep breaths. On the wall, a message was scrawled, "To see beyond the stars is to see the face of God." Ethan introduced me to his friends, Maya, an archivist, Tyler, a security guard, and Lila, a young intern with an interest in the occult. They had all experienced the anomaly of Floor 5. Our curiosity became an investigation that led us down a rabbit hole of NASA's past, of expeditions kept from the public record, and of astronauts who were sent not to explore space but to reach into other realms. I was lying awake at night, reading an old journal Ethan had found, when I heard it, a voice, not through my window or door, but inside my head, whispering in a language I felt I shouldn't understand, but somehow did. "We opened the path, and they followed us back," it said. The more we learned, the more things spiraled out of control. Tyler was found dead, his body twisted in a grotesque manner that no human could achieve, a look of absolute horror etched onto his face. I was walking through Floor 5 with Maya when she whispered to me that she had seen the suits with their helmets facing her, no matter which direction she moved. When she looked again, they were all facing away, as if to hide something unspeakable. We found books on devil worship among the possessions of a long-missing astronaut, theories of celestial beings, and accounts of exorcisms performed in space. I was driving to meet Lila one evening when Ethan called me, panic tinging his words. "The whispers are growing louder." They're more than voices now, they're here, he choked out. By the time I arrived, I was met by a silence that was suffocating. Ethan and Lila were nowhere to be found. The only thing left was a recording of the last transmission received from an astronaut who was supposed to be dead, a man who had vanished into the abyss of space. His voice was a sonnet of madness, speaking of entities that dwelled in the darkness between stars, creatures that had been waiting for a door to our world. The police said Ethan and Lila simply disappeared. But I knew better. I'd seen the horror etched into the walls of floor 5, felt the breath of something ancient and malevolent on the back of my neck. The story of floor 5 became a legend, a creepypasta whispered about in the corners of the internet. To the world, it was just a story. To me, it was a chilling memory of a time when the veil was lifted, and we glimpsed the terrible truth of what lies beyond the stars. To this day, I can still feel the whispers tugging at the edge of my thoughts, reminding me of the horror that awaits in the unseen corners of the universe. And sometimes, when the night is still and the darkness complete, I wonder if they ever really left, or if they're still here, watching and waiting. Story number 4. I was sitting in the cramped living room of our family home in a leafy suburb, thumbing through an old photo album when my brother, Caleb, burst through the door, his eyes wild with the kind of fear that chills your bones. "I found something big," he said, dropping a stack of old papers on the coffee table. It was 2004, a time when conspiracy theories were often shared in hushed tones and not so openly as they are now. Caleb worked at the local university's archive, and he had stumbled upon evidence of a secret Apollo mission, one that NASA had stricken from the records, Apollo XX. He talked of spectral astronauts seen wandering the stacks, their visages flickering like old TV static, their touch as cold as the void of space. I thought it was stress, maybe a trick of the light, but the fear in his voice told me it was something more. As we delved deeper into the mystery, we uncovered a disturbing film canister labeled Apollo XX, Lunar Landing. I was sitting beside Caleb in his cluttered apartment when we watched the footage for the first time. The grainy film showed astronauts descending the lunar module's ladder onto a hitherto unseen part of the moon's surface, a dark, foreboding place that didn't look like the barren landscapes from other missions. Their voices were tense, expectant, and then terrified. "We're not alone here," one astronaut's voice crackled over the radio before the footage dissolved into static. Caleb and I were determined to understand what happened. With the help of his friends, Jess, an aspiring journalist, and Marcus, a tech-savvy kid, we began to piece together the doomed mission's narrative. I was driving back from the university one evening when Jess called, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're here, the astronauts. I saw one in the reflection of my screen," she said, terror straining her every word. By the time I arrived, her apartment door was ajar, and she was gone, her computer screen still on, displaying the last thing she had been writing about an ancient form of lunar devil worship. As the investigation continued, unexplained deaths began to surround the mystery of Apollo XX. Marcus was found dead, an old book of exorcisms open in his lap, his face frozen in an expression of utter horror. I was walking through the stacks of the university archive where Caleb had first seen the spectral figures when I heard a voice behind me, as if an astronaut's helmet muffled it. "It's still here, on Earth," it whispered before vanishing into thin air. The more we discovered, the more the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Footage hinted at a dark presence on the lunar surface, a shadow that consumed light, a whisper in the static that promised dark, ancient knowledge. Caleb vanished like the others, leaving behind a note that simply read, "The dark side of the moon hides a darker secret." The authorities dismissed the disappearances as a string of unfortunate events, but the local community knew better. They whispered of Apollo XX, of ghostly astronauts, and of something sinister brought back from the moon. These events became a creepypasta, a story to chill the bones of those who heard it. To me, it's more than a story, it's a memory, a warning of the horrors that lurk beyond our world, in the cold, dark reaches of space. I still look up at the moon, wondering about the truth of Apollo XX, about Caleb, and the others. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the static-filled whispers of those who ventured too far and of the darkness that followed them home. Story number 5. In 2005, a time still reverberating from the echoes of the new millennium, I was living in a small, nondescript suburb, the kind where secrets and stories blend seamlessly into the mundane. It was during these days of relative innocence that my brother, Ethan, found himself entangled in an event that would scar the psyche of our quiet community forever. I was walking through the university campus when Ethan called me, his voice trembling. "I need you to come to the lab, now," he said, urgency cutting through the static. Ethan was a sound engineer for a research team at the university. They had been analyzing space signals as part of a SETI-like program when they intercepted something otherworldly. The signal was a symphony of horror, a melody so enchantingly terrifying that members of Ethan's team began to succumb to mass hallucinations. They described seeing spectral figures, hearing whispers of a language not spoken by any living creature. I watched Ethan grow pale, a man who once stood firmly on the rational ground now crumbling into the abyss of the unexplainable. Ethan's best friend, Ava, a cognitive psychologist, and Leo, an ambitious intern with an interest in the paranormal, joined our quest for answers. We were driven by a mix of fear and fascination, the primal part of our brains ensnared by the same tune that haunted the others. I was driving back from the library, where I had been scouring old texts on mythological creatures, when Ethan called, speaking in a frantic whisper. "It's not just a signal, it's a siren's call," he said. The team had discovered an abandoned sonic experiment from decades prior, one aimed at tapping into the base fears of the human psyche. The source of the signal was a machine, one designed to experiment with frequencies that could manipulate emotions. But this machine had been left abandoned on Titan, sending its dread frequency across the solar system. As the days grew shorter and the night longer, so too did the shadows around us. I was walking through the halls of the sound lab when I found Ethan, alone, listening to the signal with an expression of sheer terror. "It's calling something," he muttered, his eyes never leaving the static-filled screens. One by one, the team disappeared. Ava vanished after claiming to see the siren of Titan in her dreams, beckoning her with a ghostly hand. Leo was found in a trance-like state, staring at the sky, whispering about the stars watching us. The signal grew stronger, and the hallucinations became shared experiences. I was sitting on Ethan's couch when the walls seemed to breathe, the shadows dancing to the tune of the siren's call. In a final attempt to stop the madness, Ethan and I drove to the remote satellite station that had been receiving the signal. It was an exorcism of sorts, our efforts to purge the demon that had taken hold of our reality. Ethan managed to disable the machine, but not before the signal had embedded itself in the very fabric of our minds. The last I saw of him, he was standing atop the satellite dish, face upturned to the heavens, singing a melody that no human should know. They never found Ethan's body. Some nights, when the sky is clear and the stars are bright, I can hear the faintest whisper of that melody on the wind. The story of the Siren of Titan became a creepypasta, a digital tale of warning about the songs that the cosmos sings and the madness they can bring. To the readers, it is a horror story. To me, it is a chilling memory, a reminder that some frequencies, once heard, can never be unheard. Story number 6. In the winter of 2006, something unspeakable happened in our small, snow-smothered suburb, where the long nights seemed to hide secrets just as the woods shrouded its creatures. My name is Alex, and this is a recollection that claws at the edges of my mind with icy fingers every time the skies grow dark and heavy with the promise of a storm. I was driving back from college for the winter break when I received a frantic call from my childhood friend, Sarah. Her voice was a cocktail of fear and confusion. "Something's wrong with the house," she said, referring to the old Victorian manor at the edge of town that had stood empty for years. Sarah, a real estate agent, had been tasked with the manor sale and had spent days there alone, staging the place for potential buyers. Joined by our friends, Mike, a local journalist always looking for a story, and Emily, a nurse whose calm demeanor had soothed us since childhood, we decided to investigate. Curiosity, that most fatal of human flaws, led us like lambs to a slaughter. I was walking through the once great halls of the manor, the air stagnant with the scent of decay and old secrets. Sarah had said she heard footsteps when no one was there, and Mike was determined to debunk her claims for his column. But there was an electricity in the air that made my skin crawl, an anticipation, as if the house itself was alive and waiting. We stumbled upon a room that wasn't supposed to exist. It was a small chapel, hidden behind a false wall, its existence a whispered legend in our town. Inside, the remnants of wax from countless candles formed stalagmites on the floor, and a single word was etched into the altar: return. The chapel set the stage for our own horror story. We were the unwitting actors, the script written in the language of the damned. Emily, with her ever-rational mind, suggested we leave, but the decision came too late. That night, as we tried to sleep in the manor to prove our bravery, the darkness breathed. Mike woke us all as he screamed, seeing figures at the edge of his vision, dancing in the shadows. I was holding my breath, trying to dismiss the panic until I too saw them, ghostly silhouettes swaying to a silent hymn. The next morning, we found an old diary belonging to the manor's last occupant, a reclusive man rumored to be involved in devil worship. The diary spoke of summoning a presence, a being that would grant eternal life in exchange for souls. I was reading the final entry when the power cut, plunging us into a darkness so absolute it felt like a weight upon our chests. The temperature dropped, our breaths became clouds, and a voice, clear as the winter's cold, whispered from every corner of the room, "Return what was given." Mike vanished that night. We found the chapel door locked from the inside, the window sealed, but he was gone. No trace, no note, nothing but the softest echo of a plea that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Sarah fell into madness, speaking in tongues and claiming the devil walked among us. It took an exorcism, one that ended with her life, to quiet the demons that spoke through her. Emily, she left town, her spirit broken, her medical career abandoned. I was alone when I burned the manor down, watching as the flames consumed the cursed chapel. But even as the embers died, I heard it, the laughter of something that had feasted well on terror and souls. The story of our night in the manor lives on in forums and whispered tales, a creepypasta for the digital age. Readers shudder at the thought of the chapel and the price of meddling with the unknown. But for me, it's not just a story. It's a past that never truly dies, a chilling reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And as I write this, the wind outside carries a melody that sounds eerily like a hymn, and I can't help but wonder if the darkness is waiting to breathe once more. Story number 7. I remember it like it was yesterday, despite wishing every day since to forget. The year was 2007, the air was thick with a heat that felt almost alien in our usually mild suburb. I was just finishing up my degree in biochemistry, naively dreaming of changing the world, when my world got turned upside down. My brother, Ethan, worked at a government-funded research facility on the outskirts of town. A place that, despite its ordinary appearance, was shrouded in whispered rumors and unsettling secrecy. I was walking across campus when Ethan called me, his voice a hushed whisper that caused the hairs on the back of my neck to stand up. "They're not who they seem," he said, a note of hysteria I'd never heard before present in his voice. "The soil, it's alive, Alex." He babbled about a soil sample from an unknown celestial body, how the organism within it had properties unlike any earthly life form. "It can think, Alex," he whispered. "And it can control." The next thing I knew, I was driving to the facility, against every instinct screaming at me to turn back. What I found there was straight out of the depths of hell. The facility was in chaos. Researchers and security personnel moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their eyes glazed over with a milky sheen. I found Ethan in his lab, barricaded behind a makeshift fortress of lab equipment. He told me of the sample, how it had been unearthed from the depths of space by a classified mission. He spoke of colleagues who started changing, becoming something other. He showed me the sample, a seemingly innocuous vial of dark soil, but within it, I saw shapes moving, reshaping, as if communicating in an unholy dance. "We have to destroy it," Ethan insisted. But before we could act, they came for us. I was fighting for my life, for Ethan's, against those who were once human. The facility became our battleground, a labyrinth of science corrupted by otherworldly horror. We lost friends that night. Jamie, a young intern with a bright future, was consumed by the entity before our eyes. Her last scream still echoes in my dreams. Mark, a security guard barely out of his teens, turned on us, his humanity erased by the alien invader. I was carrying Ethan out after he was injured, trying to save what little family I had left, when the creature inside the sample made its move to escape. The building shook with the violence of its fury, and I realized the soil wasn't just alive, it was malevolent. We set the lab ablaze, the fire consuming the infected and the sample. The flames illuminated the night, a beacon of our desperation. Ethan and I escaped, just barely, watching as the fire reduced the facility to ruins. The official story was a gas leak, an unfortunate accident, but those who were there know the truth. We were part of something unexplainable, something that had no place on Earth or in the heavens above. Ethan and I never spoke of it again. He left town, changed by the horrors we faced. I stay, haunted by the memories, the loss, and the ever-present fear that somewhere, in the depths of space, there is more of that unearthly soil, waiting. This story, my story, has spread through hushed tones and frantic keyboard strokes, morphing into a creepypasta for the digital age, a modern-day campfire tale. But to me, it's a living nightmare, a past that whispers in the quiet moments, warning me that what was unearthed once can be unearthed again. I was one of the lucky ones. I survived. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is silent, I wonder if it's truly over, or if the unearthly sample was just the beginning. Story number 8. I was in the middle of my forensic psychology fellowship when my brother Daniel called me, his voice a mixture of fascination and dread. He was a junior engineer at NASA, and what he disclosed over the phone felt like a plot ripped from a science fiction novel. "It's like he's been copied," Daniel whispered, referring to Commander Scott Aldrin, name changed for confidentiality, an astronaut who had just returned from the International Space Station. "Everyone around him is changing." I was walking through a quiet park when he told me, and I can still recall the dissonance of children's laughter in the background clashing with the growing chill in my spine. I thought of Daniel's words as an intriguing aberration until the night I found myself driving to NASA's campus at an ungodly hour because Daniel hadn't returned my calls. What I stumbled upon that cold, starless night was beyond the realm of my academic theories and rational thought. The campus was eerily quiet as I snuck through the corridors, looking for my brother. Then I saw him, or someone who looked exactly like him, conversing with Aldrin. My breath caught in my throat, and I hid behind a column. But that wasn't Daniel. This person had all his features, his voice, but carried a sinister aura that sent waves of terror down my back. I found the real Daniel locked in his office, pale and shaken. "There's something wrong with them, Anna," he said. "They're not themselves anymore." He had been collecting evidence since Aldrin's return, trying to understand the phenomenon. Everyone who spent time with Aldrin became like him, too perfect, too precise, and utterly devoid of any real emotion. They became duplicates of a sort, void of what made them human. "They're like vessels," Daniel murmured, showing me the security footage where Aldrin's blank stare sent a shiver through my body. "I think they've been duplicated by something celestial." The real horror gripped us when we saw a video of Daniel walking in the hall, talking and laughing, a doppelganger indistinguishable from my true brother beside me. We began to dig deeper, piecing together reports, personal accounts, and CCTV footage. The truth was maddening. An otherworldly entity had latched onto Aldrin in space, a celestial parasite that cloned its host, spreading like a virus upon return to Earth. We gathered evidence and were planning to expose the truth when it all spiraled into madness. One by one, those who were close to the situation began to die. Unexplained deaths ruled as heart attacks or strokes, but we knew better. The night we decided to go public, our world turned into a living nightmare. Daniel disappeared. I was relentlessly pursued by those who had been duplicated, and every shadow seemed to whisper threats of duplication. In desperation, I burned all the evidence, hoping it would stop the spread. The duplicates became erratic without it, their movements unnatural, their presence haunting. I was driving away from the campus for the last time when I saw him, my brother, or rather it, smiling at me from the rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat. But when I turned, there was nothing there. The investigation died with the evidence. People moved on, but the events of 2008 remain a spectral scar across my memory. The duplicates still walk among us, their origins and purpose a mystery, lurking in the guise of friends and family. I live in the shadows now, always watching over my shoulder for a glimpse of my brother, or a celestial twin wearing his face. The events transformed into a creepypasta, whispered about on internet forums and told in hushed tones as a warning. But this isn't just a story. It's a memory, a terrifying account of the year the celestial twin came to Earth, and the unspeakable horrors that followed. It's a reminder that out there, in the vast, cold space, there are things beyond our understanding, and some of them have found their way here. Story number 9. I remember the rain that night, a relentless, pounding cascade that seemed to drown out the rest of the world as I drove to my brother Liam's apartment. He was a cryptographic analyst for NASA, a job that seemed to mesh well with his natural introversion and love for puzzles. But that night, the terror in his voice sliced through the storm and the static on the line. "They didn't want us to hear it, Sarah, but I did. I heard it all." His living room was chaotic, papers strewn everywhere, multiple computer screens flickering with incomprehensible data. His hands were shaking as he handed me a printout, his words tumbling out faster than I could catch them. "It's from the dark side of the moon, a distress signal that wasn't meant for us. But it found its way here, somehow." I was walking around the room, trying to make sense of the graphs and figures, but it was the transcript of the message that sent shivers down my spine. Warning, convergence is upon you. Seal the veil or face our fate. I asked Liam what it meant, but he was past explanations, past reason. He deciphered a message from a parallel Earth, a world that had succumbed to some cosmic horror, a breach in reality that allowed things, entities, to slip through. In the days that followed, Liam became obsessed, reaching out to online forums, collecting stories from around the suburb where we lived, a suburb that had seen a recent spate of bizarre occurrences. Exorcism deaths, unexplained disappearances, sightings of apparitions that couldn't be explained by tricks of the light or overactive imaginations. We met with others like us, Rachel, a journalist who'd lost a colleague to a mysterious suicide, Mike, a paramedic who'd been called to too many scenes with bodies contorted by unseen forces, Sophie, a student who'd been researching the rise in occult activities in our area. We were all under 30, all touched by the growing darkness, all desperate for answers. Our investigation led us to an abandoned house on the edge of town, the epicenter of the disturbances. We should have turned back, but the pull to know, to understand, was too strong. I remember the darkness inside, a void that swallowed sound and hope. We found a room with symbols scrawled across the walls and something that I pray was red paint. At its center, a circle of ash and bone. It was a gateway, we realized, a thin spot in the veil between worlds. It happened so fast, the shadows writhing, the air turning cold, the feeling of being watched by countless unseen eyes. We tried to close the circle, to end the nightmare we'd stumbled into, but the darkness had already tasted our world and hungered for more. The deaths started that night. Rachel was the first, found with her eyes wide open in terror. Mike disappeared, leaving behind only a voicemail that was a symphony of screams. Sophie went mad, speaking in languages she didn't know, her words a prophecy of doom. I was driving away from it all when the whispers began, a cacophony of voices that promised unspeakable things. I drove until the car ran out of gas, until the sun rose and banished the voices to the corners of my mind. Liam vanished. Some say he found a way to seal the breach. Others claim he was taken by the very forces he sought to stop. The messages stopped soon after, but the veil remains thin, frayed by the signal that should never have been heard. The Dark Side broadcast became a cautionary tale, a creepypasta for the digital age, but for those of us who were there, it's a constant reminder. We live with one eye on the shadows, waiting for the veil to tear once more, for the darkness to spill through. As for me, I find solace in the daylight, in the spaces where I can pretend that the world is as it should be. But when night falls, I can't help but wonder if the voice that sometimes whispers my name is coming from the dark side of the moon or from just behind the fragile curtain that separates us from the abyss.